Hey everyone, welcome to Just Mental Health with Steph and Em, the podcast where we discuss mental health from a social justice lens. I'm Emily.
And I'm Stephanie. A quick disclaimer before we get started. We are mental health professionals, but this is not to be taken as professional advice.
We are also aware that our privilege may cloud our perspective on some topics, and we not only welcome but encourage you to message us with criticism and correction. Let's get started. So our small business shout out this week is a friend of mine. Her name is Shiley. Shiley guides you on how you can be unforgettable to your referral network by bringing your reputation online. She loves cutting down the shiny object syndrome. I like that, of choices her clients have when it comes to marketing. She teaches you how to give your network the information they didn't know they needed about your business. Though she shines on LinkedIn, a lot of what she shows her clients is not platform dependent and can be used no matter the platform. She has coached over 200 clients one-on-one and in groups. One of her clients described her as meets them where they are and takes them where they want to go. So if you would like to take your LinkedIn profile to the next level and attract the clients and relationships you want, sign up to get her favorite LinkedIn profiles at yoursocialmediasherpa.com. So yoursocialmediasherpa, SHERPA.com.
Cool.
So that is very cool. So go ahead and it looks like you can even send her a voice or text message as well on the website if you want to get in touch with her quickly, or you can sign up to get you can submit your name and email on the website. Lots of stuff you can do on the website. So definitely keep that in mind if you're looking for any of those services. And we will, as usual, add that to our posts on Instagram. So now let's go ahead and move on to our topic. Today we're going to be talking about the myth of the connection between mental illness and mass shooters. So we wanted to talk about this because obviously mass shootings are an extremely tragic thing that happened way too often, and people don't really understand them, and people want to make it about mental illness, and there's just so much misinformation that is caught up in that discussion that we want to see if we can talk about today. So something I wanted to share that I listened to in another podcast that I thought summed up a significant point about this conversation. This podcast is called Inside Mental Health. It's a podcast by Psych Central, and they had a guest, Dr. John Grohl. So he shared that there was a study from the National Council Research Panel that said that mass shooters share a set of characteristics. And those characteristics include males who have feelings of hopelessness, grievances frequently related to work, school, finances, or interpersonal relationships, a feeling of being victimized, and they sympathize with others they perceive to be similarly mistreated. They have a general indifference to life and don't mind dying by suicide. So you often hear, that the mass shooter shot a lot of people before shooting themselves. Is something that often happens. So the thoughts I had about that were what's listed there. Sure, those are mental health issues, but those are not diagnosable mental illnesses.
Right.
A person that has feelings of hopelessness or grievances toward an interpersonal relationship or feels like they're being mistreated, those are feelings and like very valid feelings, but they're not a mental illness. Mental health issues is not the same as a diagnosable mental illness. Also, this is correlation, not causation.
Yeah.
So some may not know what that means. So, like a classic example to explain that is, as ice cream sales go up, murders go up. Does that mean ice cream causes murders? I'm talking about ice cream again.
Always ice cream.
But that was like, it's a class, like people use that to explain
they would say that all the time in grad school.
Yeah.
Like, why is this always the one we go to?
But but obviously ice cream sales do not cause murder. It is because more people buy ice cream in the summer and more murders happen in the summer.
And there could be lots of different reasons for that.
Right. Yeah. And that's also not saying warm weather causes, I mean, I think it's like warm weather causes people to want ice cream. Because, for sure. Like, that's not to say warm weather causes murders. So all of these, the vast majority of these mass shooters share these characteristics. That's not to say that these characteristics cause the mass shootings, because how many people in the world feel, or at some point in their lives have felt exactly how this is describing and don't kill people.
We see lots of people every day. That's our job. People that have interpersonal relationship issues, or feel hopeless, or feel slighted in some way, or, you know, have these feelings of maybe they feel like they're an outcast. We see those people every day, and they do not go on to harm anyone, let alone do something like a mass shooting, which is quite it's just on the extreme of violent crime. It is way, way, towards the end to do something like that. And when you said, like, they oftentimes don't care whether they live or die, they go in with the plan of either killing themselves or being killed. That's
knowing that in the process of killing these people that
it's going to happen. Like, they know they don't plan to get away with it. That's usually not switching gears a little bit with that is because they don't plan to get away with it. They plan to die. Only a very small amount of mass shooters have lived after they've committed their crimes. And because of that, it makes it really hard to study people that do mass shootings, because when the person that you need to study typically dies, right, then everything that you're looking at it's really hindsight, and it's a lot of speculation. You obviously can't interview them and ask them what's going on. So the data that we have on mass shooters is not as much as we would on other types of violent offenders. And I think that contributes to some of the misinformation about what causes these things. And so, like you said, mental health issues and diagnosable mental illness are different things. We all have mental health issues. And you had said earlier when we were talking about this, 5% of the population, is that what you said, have mental illness? 20%. Oh, 1 in 5. Okay, I was like, that seems way too low.
Have diagnosed, but there are plenty who go undiagnosed. So the number of people who actually have mental illness
is more
pretty
than
much
you even know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if mental illness was the contributing factor to these sorts of crimes, there would be a lot more.
Right. And you see all these headlines. Like, I saw a headline that said 1/3 of mass shooters have a mental illness. Well, what at the very least 1/5, like I said, most likely more of the population, probably about 1/3 in general have a mental illness. So to say that, it's just all these misleading headlines that's just perpetuating this.
Right.
Myth.
And what is the mental illness? What is it? Anxiety, depression, or do they have what we typically call a severe mental illness, which we can talk about that for a minute, is usually when we talk about severe mental illness, we talk about people that have mental illness that cause like psychotic episodes or hallucinations or delusions. So you typically would think of people with schizophrenia or a paranoid personality disorder or, really severe bipolar disorder where they may lose touch with reality. That's a severe mental illness, quote unquote, because there are a lot more risk associated for that person with that mental illness. And when I say risk, I mean to themselves. So,
to themselves. Sorry, I just wanted to reiterate.
Yeah. You are, unfortunately, if you have a severe mental illness, you are more likely to be the victim of a crime than to commit a violent crime. Non-violent crime is a little different, but a violent crime, you are more likely to be the victim. You're also more likely to harm yourself than anyone else. And so, in doing some research on this, because I had always been under the impression that, hearing about these things, I'd always thought, well, obviously, mental illness is not the cause of this. But then I was like, do I really have enough like evidence to support that? Or do I just believe that? So I went looking at different studies that had been done. And some of the things that they pointed out was, okay, so mass shootings by people with serious mental illness represent less than 1% of all yearly gun-related homicides. In contrast, deaths by suicide using firearms account for the majority of yearly gun-related deaths. The overall contribution of people with serious mental illness to violent crime is only about 3%. When these crimes are examined in detail, an even smaller percentage of them are found to involve firearms. And then it says, we'll get to that in a minute. It says people with, now I can't find it. People with severe mental illness are more likely to use firearms on themselves. So suicide by firearm than to use it on anyone else. And so the majority of firearm related deaths that are caused by people with mental illness, they're also the victims. So it's to just sort of put it as, okay, well, it's a gun issue and it's a mental illness issue. It's just not, it's just not accurate. There's so many more things contributing to this. Of course, neither of us are experts on this, but we are mental health professionals and we do, keep up with what's going on in the world.
Yeah, working knowledge of these things. Yeah, and I mean, this is all just very like tainted by the stigma, because and it's very, I mean, people with mental illnesses are in danger. Like you said, they're more likely to be harmed, whether that's by themselves or by others, than they are to harm others. And it's ableism. Like people with mental illnesses are not advocated for enough in our society. And then you have all of these people that are blaming mental illness on mass shootings. That's just, ostracizing these people even more, when really what they need is help in order to keep themselves protected rather than keeping others protected. And it just steers away from the issue of people with severe mental illnesses need help for themselves. Like it steers away from the actual issue.
Right. And so, of course, this is not to say that there are no mass shooters or no violent offenders with mental illness, because obviously that's not true, but there it's not the majority of them. And people with mental illness who tend to be more violent it's usually more of a interpersonal violence and not a mass terroristic sort of thing. They're not planning, because when you think about the things we know, what we do know about mass shooters is there is a lot of planning involved prior. So usually it takes a long time for them to kind of work up to committing this crime. There's a lot of fantasy involved. There is a lot of planning, getting the supplies, preparing sort of for their death, what they assume they're going to die. So they plan for it, writing a manifesto, things like that. It's a slow burn sort of thing. And people with severe mental illness typically cannot, if it's that severe, cannot maintain it in that way. So if we're talking about someone with, severe schizophrenia or something that is lost touch with reality, is unable to plan a crime of this scale, because that sometimes they can't even remember to take their medicine, or they can't remember their doctor's appointments, or they get lost where they're going, because, if it's that severe, they're not planning these things that far ahead. It takes a certain level of being grounded with reality and forefront to be able to plan something like this.
And this severe mental illnesses are like they're episodic, like that you have an episode.
Yeah.
And in that episode, you're probably more likely like scared for yourself. Like in that episode, what you're most likely thinking about is, oh my God, I'm having an episode. How do I make it stop?
Yeah.
You're not thinking about how do I go and kill multiple people.
Right.
It's just not where your mind is.
Right. And so I'd kind of mentioned this, I think, before on this podcast, when I had worked in a psychiatric hospital, my job before the one that I have now. I was there 6 months, but I worked in the what we called the severely mentally ill unit. And the patients that went there were patients who were having psychotic breaks. So very few of them were connected to reality. Very few of them could tell you what day it was. These were people that were in the middle of a severe, extreme mental health episode. And it often was the same people. We saw them a lot. And that sort of kind of, touches on how we take care of those with mental illness and the homeless population and things like that. But there was a lot as far as them being violent, very, very rare were they violent towards anyone. Most of the time it was, if anyone ever had to be like sedated or put into the quiet room, which is a misnomer because nobody's quiet in the quiet room. And that's a whole nother thing about how we treat psychiatric patients. But anyways, if they had to be sedated with some Ativan, Benadryl, Halidol, a nice little cocktail of that, which will knock you out for 12 hours, most people, it was because they were either trying to harm themselves or they could not be calmed down and they were harming property. Very rarely were they attacking anyone else. There was maybe one or two that tried, but it was very easy to stop. And that was mostly because they felt that person was threatening them. So at least from my experience there, every person that was having a psychotic episode and attacked anyone else was already afraid. They already thought that person was trying to hurt them. So it was more of a defensive thing.
Right.
There was no this like walking in and being like, I just hate this person, I'm going to mess with them.
And like you said a few minutes ago, it's that one person in that one room. It's not like they're scheming to murder multiple people. And I remember you had to learn a bunch of holds.
Yeah.
Right?
Thankfully, I never had to use them as the
right, exactly. You never had to use them. And that was...
But I saw some takedowns. Like, I'm not going to lie. There were some people that were usually, and okay, I'll just be real with you. Yeah, there were a lot of people with severe mental illness, but the ones that had the most difficulty and needed the most interaction from the staff were the ones who were using drugs. So that's really a whole nother thing. Most of the violent ones were the ones that were using drugs.
Yeah.
So that is a little different, but they were under the influence. And once the drugs were out of their system, they were not violent to anybody. They kept to themselves, or they were actually very friendly and nice. But yeah, so it was usually, there were some staff that got hurt in the scuffle, but it just wasn't what you would expect when you hear a severe mental illness unit. It wasn't like I walked around there, all the time, not concerned for my safety at all. Never concerned that anyone was going to hurt me.
And if people became mass shooters as a result of mental illness, you would think that we would hear more mass shootings in psychiatric hospitals, but we never hear about a mass shooting that happened in a hospital. I mean, how could they get a gun in there? I mean, maybe, but like still,
people would try, but it was not like it was hard to sneak stuff in. And, I mean, there were people that tried, but also that was the other thing. Like, some people would come in with guns, they would get confiscated. And I remember some of the staff being like, well, why is this person allowed to have a gun? Like, they're, they have these issues. And I'm like, well, because first of all, like, you have the right to have a gun in Kentucky. Like, that's the law. They can have it. There's no reason they can't have it. They're not a violent offender. They have no felony. Their right has not been taken away from them. We're just holding the gun while they're in the hospital. They get it as soon as they leave. And so for some people that was scary to think like, but by the time they left, they were out of that episode, or they were back on their medication and they were going to the next thing that they needed to do. It wasn't like we let anyone leave in the middle of a psychotic episode.
I have a question. I'm interested in your take on. So, what we're talking about is what we've been talking about is more mental illnesses that are more episodic. But illnesses such as personality disorders is a personality disorder, which means it's always there day to day, and it's not so much episodic. So I could see someone saying, well, what about those with antisocial personality disorder? Wouldn't they, which, I don't know, sociopath, is that the same thing?
That's what, most of the time.
Would a person with antisocial personality disorder be able to plan and come up with a plan to do a mass shooting in the way that you described that most people with mental illnesses
I think that would depend on their level of functioning. I'm sure there are people Well, I know there are people with antisocial personality disorder that could do that. I mean, you know, when you talk about serial killers, a lot of them fall under that sort of diagnosis. But there's also a lot of people with antisocial personality disorder that don't have any desire to harm other people. They might just, you might see a lot of maybe nonviolent offenses or drug charges or something in their history. They're not out there trying to plan to kill a whole bunch of people. They don't care about people enough. You know what I mean? That's kind of the whole point. And they're like, I don't want to deal with people, so I'm going to keep to myself. There were people there that that had antisocial personality disorder, and they were, well, at least this one person that I'm thinking about, he was violent only until the cops came. Like he would be really aggressive and then the cops would show up and then he would change his tune. And I feel like that was sort of, he was more like showing off anyways. He wasn't really the kind of person that was like gonna plan an attack on anybody. He was just trying to get what he wanted in that moment. So I don't know. It all depends on functioning, because if you think about, to plan something like a mass shooting takes a lot, like we had just said, a lot of planning. It takes time. It's a slow burn. You have to have a level of patience to be able to do that. And so it's not really an impulse thing either. And when we talk about people with these personality disorders or severe mental illness, a lot of the issue is the impulse control. This is not an impulsive thing, usually, very rarely. It's something that's planned. So an impulsive thing might be a bar fight, you know, but you're not months gathering guns and weapons and making a bomb or, you know, deciding how you're going to enter a school to kill anyone. Like, it's just, that's not what the trend is. Yeah. And so there were a lot of, kind of going to get off this topic in a minute, but one of the things that I had to do when I worked at the hospital was a duty to warn. And so what that is if you are a mental health professional and somebody makes a threat, a specific threat to a person or a group of individuals, you have an ethical obligation that's called a duty to warn. And in the hospital, I've never had to do this out in any outpatient, but in the hospital, we got a lot of people that would come in and would say, I'm going to kill this person. I'm going to shoot this person when I get out, blah, 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 blah. And it was almost like, it kind of got to the point, the culture there was sort of like, we all kind of rolled our eyes and was like, yeah, sure you are. Because it never happened. Like, by the time they got out, you know, they were not in the middle of that episode. Like I said, they were on medication. They had gotten some sleep. The drugs were out of their system. They were like, no, I would never do that. I don't remember saying that, you know, but we still had to make a duty to warn. So we'd have to call the local police department where they were being released to and say, just let you know, this person came in on this day. They're being released on this day. We'd have to give their name, and we'd have to say that's like a white male, 6'2", English speaking, whatever, you know, it's basic demographics. And then we'd say, this is the threat that they made. And the person, usually it was like the receptionist, would take it and be like, all right, cool, thanks. And that was it. And it got to the point I'd have to do so many of them because I worked on the unit where everyone was making threats. I'd have to do so many of them. And this person expressed that they're going to go home and they're going to kill their mother. And the cop was like, all right, let me ask you some information. And like, it was so mundane and nothing ever happened. Like, they never did anything about it. They weren't checking up on these people. Sometimes it was the same people over and over again because they were often coming back in for help. And they were like, yeah, we know this person. Yeah, this is like the third one this month that we've had to, and they just it wasn't a serious threat in their eyes. And so I don't know, that kind of, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's not. Like, the police know that there's people that make threats all the time and don't do anything about it. But also, what if somebody was serious? We're not taking it seriously. What if somebody had made a threat and then got out and was like, yeah, everything's fine. And you're like, okay, cool. Take your meds, stay away from drugs. It'll be okay. And they're like, all right, cool. And then they go and do it. I mean, we still had to warn and make a report, but I don't know.
Right.
The police were not following up on these things. You know what I'm saying? Like, they were just like, oh, whatever, it happens.
And it does. I mean, yeah, like it probably, if they are getting those calls so often, and also the thing to note here in regard to our topic is that you never once, correct me if I'm wrong, had someone say, I want to go out and shoot tens of hundreds of people. Like, it was like, I have this.
It was always an individual.
Right. That had this urge to hurt one person and then they don't act on it.
Right.
Yeah. One
time somebody made a threat against Taylor Swift, no lie. And I had to call Taylor Swift's manager, no lie. No. Yes.
Oh my God.
And had to talk to him. Yeah, for real. And I had to be like, this person came in and made a threat. Well, I didn't tell him this because I couldn't, but the story was he believed that Taylor Swift was in love with him and was sending him messages. And then I guess something had happened and apparently she broke his heart some way. So, and this man had never had any interaction with Taylor Swift at all. But, so he made a threat against her. So we had to call the manager. And of course the manager was like, why can't you tell me who this person is? And I'm like, because of HIPAA laws. And he's like, well, how am I supposed to protect her? And I'm like, I don't make the rules. I can't tell you who he is. I can just tell you someone made a threat. Nothing happened. You know what I mean? The guy felt better. He left. We never saw him again. Nothing was on the news about an attack on Taylor Swift. Yeah. There was lots of against the president, and Secret Service would have to come in and interview these people. And just as sort of like, routine. And so there was a lot of times we'd see, Secret Service in and we'd have to escort them to the patient and sit with them. And when the men in black suits show up, people are like, no, I love the president. I don't want to kill him at all. Like, you're like, that's not what you said 24 hours ago, but okay. But no, nobody was serious, it was just.
Yeah. And, and so like, like we said, like we're hearing all of these empty threats against individuals, yet there's this myth that's being perpetuated that mentally ill people commit mass murders. And it's just not true. So like you working in this population where you see, and none of these people didn't stay for very long.
No.
They stayed until they were stable.
Like 3 days.
You saw a lot of people with severe mental illness, and not once did you get a threat of a mass shooting.
No, and I'm sure it does happen. So I'm sure there's clinicians listening that are like, I've had that happen. But that's always going to be a possibility. When we look at these people that have actually gone through with it and have actually done these mass shootings, they're not seeking out mental health services. And I think that is a big difference. The people that are getting help for their mental illness know, okay, something's not right. I don't want to hurt anybody, even though I'm having these thoughts, and they're trying to get treatment. And the people that do want to hurt people and don't seek out help, you know what I mean? There's a big difference there.
Yeah.
being
And
aware that you have some sort of hallucination or psychotic disorder, and not being aware, or just feeling like really a sense of entitlement to certain things, and that's why you feel slighted against different groups of people.
Right, that's where I was just gonna go, that we need to talk about the bigotry involved in mass shootings, because it is often targeting Black people more recently. I mean, it's not the first time that I was going to say more recently Asian people, but that's not the first time, but it's getting talked about more. Sex workers with the recent incident. There was the shooting. There's been shootings in synagogues, Jewish people. That there's so that's another piece of it, like where it's said, like grievances, like often people who commit mass murders are have grievances or feel like they're being victimized or mistreated, and a lot of them vast majority are male, mostly white, have this belief that a certain group of people, Black people, Asian people, women, Jewish people, are mistreating them, or like this group of people has taken something from them, or have just some sort of deep-seated hatred toward this group of people, and therefore want to commit mass murder against these people. And bigotry is not a mental illness. So again, like, it's just yet another point to demonstrate that mental illness is not the driving force behind this.
Yes, exactly. There, I think when you look at what you had read earlier about the things we know that mass shooters all have in common, like you had said, there was no diagnosable mental illness in any of that. Those were all things that anyone can feel at any time. So I think we need to be looking at not what are their diagnoses are, or their access to guns. We need to be looking at what was the motivation behind that. What were they trying to say by committing a crime like this? Because usually they're trying to say something, even if it's I'm angry, like.
I think needing to look at, I mean, I think you would agree with this, that looking at the gun laws and looking at the what the root of the problem is. It does, and that's another thing that I really want to say, is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. A lot of people want to be like, well, you can say, oh, make all these gun laws, but like the root of the problem is like it's actually caused by this, or it's caused by this, or it's caused by this. Okay, but like, sure, but people wouldn't be able to carry out whatever the cause is, the action that is caused by whatever the cause is, if they didn't have a gun. So until we can get to the root of the problem, we need to change the gun laws, because getting to the root of the problem is going to be a long process. Another point, given that the vast majority of mass shooters are males, how much of a role is toxic masculinity playing in this? So, we know that toxic masculinity, the culture, leads men to not seek help. So those that are feeling hopeless or have grievances or feel victimized aren't going to tell anyone. Men are often shamed for sharing their emotions. Men are often socialized to be more aggressive, to deal with their emotions by being aggressive. So that's yet another component to this that's worth mentioning.
Yes, definitely. Like 96% I think, are committed by men, which is a huge amount. So we definitely need to be talking about the fact that
almost 100, like 96% is like basically 100.
Well, it's very close.
Yeah.
And so we need to be talking about, well, the one thing that we know they all have in common is that they are male. So what is the correlation between that? Nobody wants to talk about that. Because, nobody wants to admit that men may have a problem with their aggression. But yeah, it's access when we talk about like mental health reform and stuff, and access to mental health services, preventative mental health services, less stigma around it would obviously help in a lot of different ways. And addressing toxic masculinity would help in a lot of different ways. Maybe it would reduce some people. Maybe it would catch some people from committing these crimes. And then on the other side, closing a lot of the loopholes in how you can buy guns would help. But again, I think that's really oversimplifies a lot of the issue as well. I think some of it is a cultural thing because we see there's so many of it in America, or in the US. And so why is that? What is it about our culture that is contributing to this issue? To this level of violence?
I think absolutely that the addressing these things, addressing the laws is imperative, but it's not the whole picture.
Right.
And there is the cultural component to it for sure.
Yeah. And so there's lots of different, if you just like look this up online, there's so many different opinions on what could help. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, because we see so much of these mass shootings in schools. And so, and by students in the schools, young people are really at a risk for being victims of this crime. Some of the things that you're seeing, like some people are saying, are just, how do you address it at that level? How do you address it when you notice a teen who is isolating and maybe is being bullied and is not doing so well in school and, is getting into a lot of trouble and things like that? They're making threats to their peers or threats online. Are we taking this serious? Are we getting this person the help they need before it becomes a major issue? And by help that they need, I don't mean because of their mental illness. I mean because something is going on with them that's building up to this. So nobody else can see this, but Emily's cat is sitting on her chest right now.
Let me deal with this real quick.
Totally.
Keep talking. I'm gonna mute myself for a second.
Yeah, go. Totally blocking her, but she's very pretty. I guess Diva has a lot to say about this.
Okay.
That's what happens. That's what happens.
Going back. Go ahead. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
No, I mean, that's kind of like, that was kind of the end of it. I didn't know if you had anything to say about that, of addressing it.
Yes. Yeah. I think so. Okay. This is reminding me of, it's so sad that I don't even remember which mass shooting it was. Because there have been so many.
I know.
Yeah, there was a mass shooting, and it was when there were walkouts happening in schools, and there was this. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like it was like a a lot of students were organizing walkouts, like as a protest.
Uh-huh.
And then some people were saying, don't walk out, walk up. Walk up to the lonely kid, walk up to the kid that
Right.
is usually like bullied or doesn't have a lot of friends, because those are the people that end up being the mass shooters. And if you walk up to them and are nice to them and friendly to them, they won't shoot you.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of talk about how that was very victim blaming, and it was very like putting the
Mm-hmm.
blame on peers and putting the burden where it shouldn't belong. Like, of course you should be nice to people and welcoming to people and talk to the person that doesn't seem to have a lot of friends, but it should be because it's a nice thing to do, not because if you don't do it you're going to risk being shot by them. So I think that I do agree with what you're saying. I think it needs to be done in a very like, first, I don't think that any burden should be put on the kids whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not
Yeah,
the children's
I
job.
think
It is the adults in their life
yeah,
that
I
should be
think that
doing
the
this.
adults need to be
Mm-hmm.
adults at schools and at home need to be given signs to look for. Um, I don't even think it should be like, I think it should just be for general mental health reasons, which is another problem, or mental health slash, you know, all of the possible causes that we're discussing, like those sorts of things in general
Mm-hmm.
are things that we need to increase awareness of and learn about how to recognize in people and how to treat it. So I do think there needs to be an increase in that. I think that I don't know if necessarily the goal behind it should be to prevent mass shootings, because that's just, it's just so much more complex than that, and it needs to, I don't know, it needs to start from a different, that's just such a strong burden to be placed on like school officials. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, right. Because we are asking them already to do a lot. But it's not just the school, and it's like you said, it's the parents, it's local law enforcement. They need to, if someone is making a report, like my son is, you know, buying these things online that to build a bomb, like why are we not taking that seriously?
yes, so those things, yeah, I guess the things like, oh, this kid is lonely and doesn't ever talk to anyone or have friends, those are not things that we should have to see as red flags for a mass shooter. Buying a bunch
Right.
of bombs, yes.
Well, right, but I think you because you have to take the whole thing into context. If someone is just like a loner, okay, that maybe that's just them. If someone is a loner and also
Yeah.
does
Mm,
these other things like making threats to their peers or being violent in school, getting in trouble a lot, using drugs, maybe there's a you know maybe they're not doing well academically, like those sorts of things all together are really part of the profile of like, okay, this could go a couple ways, but why are we not reaching out to these kids, we being adults reaching out to kids like this and maybe hopefully changing the trajectory, maybe.
mhm.
So it's just, I think everyone wants to blame. There's always something to blame, right? Like with the Columbine shooting, it was the whole like satanic panic, where it was like, oh, it's because they're Satanist. And then it was like, oh, because it's heavy metal music. Oh, because it's video games. Oh, because it's, being bullied online. And like, it's always something that they're now, it's mental illness. It's all these different things. But one thing that has been common in these trends is the mass shootings, whether there's been heavy metal music involved or their own religious beliefs, or even, pre-internet, pre-video games, these were still happening. So we need to look at what those similarities are and what can a community do to help those individuals and to maybe reduce these incidents from happening. Because I do think it's one of those things that becomes a community thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
making good points.
But yeah, like we said, we're not experts on this, obviously. And I'm sure that, and if anyone is really interested in this, then I do suggest that they kind of do their own research. And I'm sure there's lots of podcasts out there right now talking about this because it's just an event that is happening so much.
And I think that just to reiterate a point I made earlier, like clearly, because you and I both have, like we said, we're not experts, but we've been following the news and we've been like, we're generally knowledgeable on these things and we've been reading and we still haven't come up, like, we don't know the answer. Like, what is the answer? What causes mass shootings? Okay, so the characteristics that I listed, this hopelessness, all we have are the correlations. There's the bigotry piece, the hopelessness, grievances toward a specific people, work, finances, groups of people, like we said, back to the bigotry piece, feeling victimized. Okay, so, but it's very complex, basically. The root cause is very complex, and
the way we address it is going to probably be as equally complex.
It'll be complex, but in the meantime, people are dying. So we need to create a short-term and a long-term plan. Which brings us back to having more legislation around control of firearms. The specific legislation is not on topic for this episode, but just want to reiterate that point that I feel very strongly that we need, given how complex the root of the problem is, we need a short and a long-term plan.
Yeah, we need to stop. We need to do something immediately to stop the bleeding, and then we also need to address the issue. And so it can be handled from both ways. And we are not politicians and we are not big into policy specifically. So no, we don't have all the answers. I certainly don't. But there are people out there working on this and studying these things and advocating for this who do know what they're talking about. And
if anyone hearing this wants to do a sequel episode and wants to
about policy specifically that could help,
I would be interested.
I think that would be good, because we're talking about the issues, but we don't have any real alternatives to offer, except we know it's going to take, they say it takes a village. It does. It's going to be a community thing, and it's also going to be a legislative thing as well. So it's going to have to come from every angle because it is so complex. So yeah.
Should we wrap up for today? Okay, cool. Well, that's our show. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with friends and family.
And don't forget to follow the show's Instagram for updates on new episodes at Just Mental Health Podcast. That is with a period between each word. We record a new episode every week. This is Steph.
And Em signing off. Thanks for listening.